Straight talk, straight answers.
Hi, and welcome to Straight Talks, Straight Answer. For today, we will be talking about and having a candid conversation as it pertains to federal procurement opportunities, the efficiency, the effectiveness, the challenges that small businesses face in the ever-changing world of federal acquisition. Today's theme will be how inside DLA, how veterans and small businesses can compete in the defense marketplace. I am so happy and thrilled to have Daniele Kurze, who is the director of the Defense Logistics Agency Office of Small Business Programs. DLA is the U.S. Department of Defense's Logistics Combat Support Agency. It's staffed by approximately 25 to 26,000 civilian and military personnel across 48 states and 28 countries. DLA manages the global end-to-end supply chain, from procurement of raw materials to disposition of end-of-life equipment for the 5 military services, 11 combatant commands, other federal, state, local agencies, and our partners across the nation. There is so much synergy and alignment with DLA and the Department of Veteran Affairs, and today we're going to have a candid conversation. Now, Danielle, as I said, I'm so glad to have you here, but I also want to start by letting everyone know when we first met back in June, July of 2025, and we had that conversation about how do we work together to ensure that our small business community, especially our service disabled and veteran business community, have an opportunity to have economic opportunity, to have access. We looked at our numbers. We looked at what DLA was doing across the line as it pertains to the service disabled veteran community, and how could we create a pipeline where that we would have those opportunities, if possible, for the small business community. You're like, sign me up.
Yes.
We are ready to go. There are so many things that we feel that we are capable of doing with the small business community, the veteran community, and I want to be a part of that. So I want to thank you. You didn't just say sign me up. You came in ready to go, full guns blasting, and I am so glad to have you. So would you start out by telling us a little about you? I want people to know your bio, to know Danielle.
Okay, well, first off, I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with the veterans and small businesses here today on behalf of DLA. So for myself, I've been with our agency a little over 16 years. In this particular role, I've been 2 years in this role. Prior to that, and you'll hear a little bit about some of our different supply chains, but I came from our weapons support supply chain that's located in Richmond, Virginia, and also in Columbus, Ohio. And there I had a couple of different leadership roles over strategic contracting, where we put performance-based contracts and tailored logistic contracts depending on our customers' needs. And then I was over our supplier operations contracting shop that did a lot of the transactional work and also long-term contracts, primarily with our small businesses. So that really gave me in-depth knowledge of some of the challenges that small businesses had with contracting in our pre and post award, and it really excited me to take on the role. So just really have a largely acquisition background, and prior to coming to DLA, I worked for the Department of Transportation, doing public-private partnerships and different financial arrangements under those. So a large acquisition background, but with a lot of understanding of the small business needs as they navigate through contracting.
Okay. So thank you for joining us, and let's just jump right on into this, okay? So we talked about there are many people in our audience, both online and in person, that they know the name DLA, but they may not be familiar or fully understand or appreciate the scale and diversity of DLA. DLA manages millions of items across aviation, troop support, energy, and many other supply chains. So can we kind of talk about that, dive into that? How does the vast mission translate into real contracting demands. So let's talk about that, please.
Okay, yeah. So as Chanel stated, we have just massive, diverse supply chains, and because our portfolio is so large, we have 9 distinct supply chains. A lot of people, when they talk to Chanel and I, for example, this kind of goes back to your opening statement. When they think of the VA and DLA, they always go to medical, but we have many more supply chains and commonality and opportunities for veteran-owned businesses. But for those non-supply chains, as Chanel stated, it crosses over from bulk fuel to different types of energy products. We also have construction and equipment, clothing and textile. We also have medical supplies and equipment, as I mentioned, and we have a large amount of repair items that we do for major weapon systems for land, sea, and air. So many that I haven't mentioned, also strategic materials. We manage the national stockpile for whole of government. So that's another thing that we do. There's been a lot of information out there with critical minerals of late. That's another area that we procure. So a really vast amount, and I think as it translates into demand for veterans or small businesses, just the sheer volume that we have requires a lot of automation for us and how we put those out. So just to give you kind of a frame from our enterprise perspective, last year we obligated over $55 billion in contracts, and $22.6 billion of that went to small business primes directly. And for the amount of awards, that really translates into every day we do over 10,000 awards a day. So you can kind of see we have a lot of automation in some of our processes and awards, which is a great thing for small businesses because it means it's quick to contract when you put the proposal in, so it reduces that administrative lead time. I would also like just to notate for our director, Lieutenant General Mark Simmerly, part of our focus is digital transformation. So a lot of what I talk about and what we're doing is changing digitally, both internally and externally, to make it easier to do business with us, and that includes our forecasting and our demand to make it more predictive to help you align a little bit better with our different supply chains.
Okay. There's often this misconception when you talk about DLA, our Department of War, with our service disabled and veteran-owned small businesses. We had a conversation in the past about their silos, that you get that sweet spot that you say, I can only work with the Department of Veteran Affairs, I'm only EPA or DLA.
Right.
But what we're trying to do is really cross those lanes and say, you know, if a veteran-owned small business, if that's their sweet spot in what they're selling, that can cross any industry or any line. Is that correct?
It's absolutely correct. I mean, just one of the things that popped in my head when you talked about EPA, for example, one of our areas is disposition services. And so we have to handle a lot of hazardous waste materials, for example. And so for companies interested in that particular area, you have to have a lot of EPA certifications that are required from EPA. So you can kind of see yourself in multiple supply chains, you know, depending on what your capability set is. But I think there's so many different crossovers between us.
And along those lines as well, we often think about DLA or DOW because you're part of DOW. Right. We kind of think of that as those big ticketed or big dollar items as it pertains to acquisition or procurement opportunities. And today, small businesses are competing. And it's that conversation that this is for prime. But I do know that as we've talked, that you're constantly looking at those vehicles and saying, how do I help my small businesses have those competition, those opportunities? Can you talk about that a little?
Yeah, I can talk about that because that is one of the myths that we hear a lot, that we primarily do businesses with larges. So I would tell you, just to give you an idea of our supplier base, we have a little bit over 8.6 thousand suppliers. 80% of those are small businesses that we actually contract primes with. But the great thing with the portfolio that we have, a lot of our requirements that come out are under the simplified acquisition threshold, which just increased, which is good for small businesses. But what that means is a majority of that is set aside exclusively for our small businesses. So I would say that's a really good area that we have. And then another area that I did want to highlight in breaking in outside of the competitive ones I just talked about that would be set aside to small businesses. So these would be the higher dollar, probably more complex items. We have other opportunities to break in. So if you see something, for example, that might be a sole source item to an OEM or a company, but you have a great idea with it, we actually have on our website items that can be reverse engineered. And so it's a digital catalog. So you'll hear me talk a lot about digital again today, where you can go and research based on your capability sets, items that are, we say, hey, these are great ones that can be reverse engineered. You can check it out just like a library, look at the different specifications. And then there's a pathway to go and to do the reverse engineering. And we actually work with the services to get source approval requests through that pathway. And typically items that we put in there at a minimum have about a $40,000 annual demand, and that's at a minimum. So it's I would consider it a significant amount. We're not putting things in there that are like $500. It has a significant amount of demand. So that's a really great way, especially for a new entrant, to break in, especially where there might be value added for our agency, whether that's more competitive pricing, shorter lead time, a longer quality item, I would say.
I understand. Are there areas of demands that are often overlooked or misunderstood at DLA?
I think so. It depends on which supply chain. One example I just gave is the demand. You'll see a huge demand signal, and you'll see, oh, that's for a sole source company. So that was one way that you could break in. But I think another area that's overlooked from a lot of small businesses where it's not competitive and open, we might have a long-term contract already in place with the prime. So you need to make sure you know when those will expire so you can start making yourself more competitive when that opportunity does arise. And then we have some small businesses that might not necessarily want to have the prime lead on a massive contract, but still participate. So we do have a lot of matchmaking events, even with our major primes, OEMs, and companies, where you can get subcontracting opportunities and then graduate out of that and become a prime for some subcontracting opportunities.
That kind of segues into something else. I know that we talked about procurement complexities.
Right.
One of those things is, given the scope or the scale of DLA's operations, many companies, they face a steep learning curve when they're trying to engage with the agency. Where do you see the most common misunderstandings about how to engage or what's being bought? I know that's one of the reasons that we're talking about later on in the summer.
Right.
You all are going to be doing an event with VA to the small business community. But what are some of those steep learning curves that you see, and how can they prepare themselves for that?
Okay, so I would say one of the steepest curves for like brand new entrants, and this would be even if you're maybe a new entrant trying to venture out into a different area or expand your capabilities. What I see the most is when a requirement comes out, you might not understand if it's fully competitive, if it's sole source, if it's commercial, if it's military specifications. And so for DLA, we have a hybrid mix of products and services. Largely what we do is provide products. A small percentage of what we do, I would say 10% roughly, are service-related type contracts that we do, and the other 90% are products. But with that, we have a lot of companies that will get a cage code and think that, hey, I'm going to quote on this. and I'm going to get a contract without doing the due diligence to look at, hey, what are those technical specifications? What are the certifications that I need? Some of the items that we have very specific testing requirements that are there. So sometimes we see where a company is very capable, but they go to through the testing for that particular item and fail.
Right.
So I think it's more understanding the particular requirements and technical specifications first before proposing.
Okay, so tell me, what do you mean when you say that 90% of your products are a hybrid mix?
So, and I probably misspoke. So out of like our whole portfolio, if you look at our whole enterprise, 90% of what we provide is material for the services.
Understand.
And I say product, but material.
Products,
material. And the other 10% is more services. So depending on which agency within the Department of War that you work with, some have a different portfolio mix where they might have more, service type contracts. But a lot of ours are for infrastructure type things. And we do have a small amount. I'll talk about some innovation areas that are service contracts.
Okay, so as we talk about that, I know within the Office of Small Business, you and I have often compared dashboards, metrics, data, because without that, it doesn't mean a thing. So those things are important. I always say put up or shut up. So having the opportunity to show those numbers, what you're doing across the social economical categories, what you're doing with Service Disabled, with veteran community, hubs on women, et cetera, 88, all of those different areas, small business. There is also you've developed a supplier tool. Yes. And it's a pathway to improve access, including what we call the Supplier Pathway tool. How can firms use this tool to better navigate the process?
Oh, thank you so much for that question. This is one of the most exciting things when we talk about digital within DLA that I'm super excited about, because I can actually see that it actually helps the small businesses first and foremost. So we talked a lot about navigating the different contracts, and within DLA, with the multitude of supply chains, and within those supply chains, we have different business units. So it's a multitude of opportunities, and then it's like, how do I navigate all these different things within this space? So what we did on our site, we created a tool that you can actually put just your nomenclature or what you're providing, whether that's a service or a product, and you type it in, and it actually will match and pull up a list of items that DLA sells. Because sometimes, and Chanel can say this, we'll have companies that come to this, and I'm like, I'm sorry, that's not what DLA procures. Great product, great capability, but that, and then we'll lead them to another agency that does. So this is really helping say, hey, this is something that I sell, or this is my capability, and it will pull up the product or service that we sell. And then it actually, you can click on the item and it will give you the historical demand for that item. So you can see, hey, is this something that has a lot of interest or demand over the last few years? And then it actually links you with our very specific supply chain that manages and procures that item. So I'll give you an example. If you I'll just pretend you put bulk fuel petroleum in, that would pull up all the items that we buy under that portfolio, and then it would take you to a very specific pathway for bulk fuel petroleum, and then it walks you through every single step from getting a cage code to the different requirements, like 504 is a requirement that we have for bulk fuel petroleum, and then it walks you through how the contracting team does the market research so you can be more of a viable partner when it comes to that. And then it actually shows you how they evaluate and what the technical requirements are. And it really walks you from beginning to end, all the way to invoicing, which is a big deal because, a lot of things that we've had in the past is, hey, just do this one thing.
Right.
And then you've got to find that next step. So this really does a beginning to end on the very specific commodity, and it lets a company know, hey, these are the certifications that I will need. These are the tech specs that I'll need to get familiar with before a requirement comes out. So it really makes you very viable when a requirement actually comes out.
Okay. We talked about, I want to step back just for a minute. We talked about aviation, support engineering, and various things that DA does across when you start to look at supply chain. But when we do a comparison, maybe here at the Department of Veteran Affairs, OIT, information technology, modernization, those things are really important. You look at the from the medical side in regards to VHA and all the things that we're doing to the medical arena. There are things that align on your side of the house that also does that. And I don't think that small businesses, veteran businesses understand that there is a correlation. And I know you hit on it a second ago, but can you kind of talk to that just a brief second?
So I would say the correlation. So when Chanel and I met, I was just super excited because I think even the misconception for the VA is that hey, you just do these products and medical, but a large part of what you also helped me with and other OSDBU or small business offices is matching veterans. Whether it supports the VA or not, to our different supply chains. So we partner a lot in that way. And I would say for our demand signals, where we can, we do cross partnering on those demand signals.
Okay, all right. Once businesses understand the system, and this is a great tool, the Supplier Pathway tool. But once they understand the system, the next question becomes readiness. So let's talk about readiness before bidding. So interest in doing business with DLA is high, but interest alone isn't. It's quite different from operational readiness. I always talk about there is tactical and then there's strategic. So let's talk about readiness before bidding. What foundational steps should veteran business complete or before submitting bids?
So, and you'll hear me foot stump this a lot because it's just really important. I'll go back again. Supplier pathway we talked about, but I think it's just so important to understand the requirement before you bid. Quite frequently, we'll see the participation because we do track and we look to see, okay, did these small businesses participate, who's participating, and then we look to see, hey, why didn't they get the award? And a lot of times they can't meet the specifications or they leave out different items that are required in the contract. And I also think this is another thing, and I don't feel like we talk about it enough, is that we talk about how you get the award, but then a lot of times I'll see the company that's perfectly capable. They get the contract and then they fail in the contract administration part. And a lot of that has to do with one, communication. So if the company's going to be late, you need to have that communication to let us know so you can avoid contract cancellation because our mission is to support the warfighter. So we want to get that product to the warfighter. But the other part, again, it could be, I'm going to give you a simple example because this always blows my mind. For a specification, we have a lot of specific packaging because we're all over the world. So we might have to have very specific packaging depending on how we're going to store the item or where it might be shipped. And a lot of times small businesses fail to actually read those requirements on the packaging. They'll deliver it to us and it gets into our warehouses and we call it frustrated stock. And so we can't ship it. And so it sits there because we have to work with that supplier, small business, to actually send it back, get it packaged correctly, and it delays payment, it delays delivery, and a lot of small businesses don't even realize, hey, why am I not getting paid? I delivered this a month ago. And so those are just some of the things I say is you kind of understand our line of business and the specifications, really kind of think not just for, hey, how do I get the award, but how do I administer it effectively so I'm getting the right product so the warfighter can get it on time and delivered.
Okay. So are there any one or two readiness issues that frequently delay otherwise capable firms, because we talk about understanding the requirements. We want them to do their due diligence, do their homework. But there's also, when you talk about readiness, sometimes there are some things that we see that can delay or keep a capable firm from being able to do that. Do you ever see that? And if so, what are some of those things?
So frequently, I'll see some companies come in that are used to just providing commercial products, like off a GSA schedule or something of that nature. So capable, they've provided it before, and then they quote on an item that's maybe similar. But again, it goes back to these technical requirements. Sometimes we have very specific military specifications, so they quote on it. And then they don't realize some of the lead times or specifications. So I still, and I know I keep saying it, but I think that's one of the biggest things that I see across the board. And we do have, so I don't want to give the misnomer that all we have are, stringent military specific items. We also do have a lot of COTS, commercial items off the shelf. But I would say, again, it's just understanding all the different things that go into delivering that product to the agency.
Okay. All right. Now, let's talk about market research.
Right.
We can't say enough. I've met many outreach engagements I've had with veteran businesses, with small businesses, and we've talked about market research. Know your competition. Know who's out there. That's good to have. And so often readiness becomes visible during market research. So when we talk about that, let's look at market research and capability positioning yourself so that you can have that opportunity. When your team reviews capability statements or market research responses, what separates a strong submission from a weak one? I don't think people really think about that.
They don't.
But there are things that separate those.
There are. I would say, a lot of companies, and Chanel and I meet with a ton of companies and we share companies.
Yes.
The thing that I see the most, we'll have a company come in and they just have a standard capability sheet. I call it a slick sheet. And it lists 1,000 things. So I can do, these 10 things, but it's not very targeted on a specific need that we have and what you're trying to sell us. Because I do look at it in a sense like business, like, do we need it? Why should we be interested? What are you offering that might be different? So I always tell small businesses, when you come, before a requirement comes out, the small business office is the first shop. You can come and provide us your capability set, and we can help match you. But with that, a lot of times I'll say, well, what's your capacity? We might have a requirement out there, for example, for 10,000 items, and the company comes and they can't tell me their capacity. So it's helpful when you're pitching to know what is your capacity. And even if it's smaller than that, we can say, hey, we can break this down and put a smaller requirement to help feed the small business area. But we have to kind of know some of those things. And then your value add, as I mentioned. So if you are coming in with an innovation or an alternative product that we might be interested in, it's saying what value would it add? Does it, and I think I said this earlier, does it provide a longer shelf life? Is it a better quality, meaning it won't break in a year? Like how long? Because that equates to money.
Yeah.
Right. So we would be interested in that. And also shorter lead times, because longer lead times prevent us from getting items faster to them. So I would also say, saying the certifications you have up front. We look at a lot of websites for companies, and I will tell you OEMs and big companies do too. And a lot of times you don't have time to swift through all of them. So we look for certain certifications. And I won't get into it today. I might highlight it, but like CMMC cyber certification is a big deal. So as you're getting that listing, if you're level 1, 2, or 3 certified, But listing those things that pop out on your site or your capability sheet, but very specific to the agency or business line that you're doing. So you really, it's kind of like a resume,
Yes.
right? When you're applying for various jobs, you really want to cater it to who you're talking to and who you're speaking to, and take the time to invest in it.
Right. We've had the conversation in regards to, and you said it yourself, with the small business office. That should be your first line of defense.
Absolutely.
If you have a question, if you want to. But the same way we as the OSDBU Small Business Office talk about as we work with the acquisition community, the procurement community, we're constantly saying we need to engage early. And that's been part of that transformation across the federal OSDBUs that we've been doing. I know at VA, I know there, and others, we've talked about engaging early. But there's also a piece for the small business, for the service disabled veteran, to engage early. What does that look like? What does meaningful vendor engagement during the market research period look like, and how can firms add value? Because so often that resume, i.e. their capability statement, that's only going to get you so far. And if you don't know how to tailor it to what the needs are, and you're using this generic capability statement, that's taking you out of the game.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
how do they engage early? Let's talk about that.
Yeah, that's a great question. You mentioned, one of the avenues is getting with the small business office that can help you kind of tailor that for DOW, and I think for all federal agencies, Apex Accelerators is one that can help you kind of build your proposal out, provide a little bit more hands-on help. And then I'll always say, look at contracts that are also getting ready to expire, especially if you're looking for higher dollar ones, and come meet with us early. And ask questions. So even when a source's sought is out, or a request for information during the market research, one of the things small businesses don't do enough is send a question back, because that really helps form and change the acquisition strategy as we're seeking more information. The other thing I would say in being ready and responsive to that is providing not just that you have past experience, but actually say how that experience relates to this contract. And I talked about capacity. Sometimes we'll have contracting officers come back and say, hey, I didn't include this small business. They just said they did this project. And so they're not qualified because we don't think that meets the capacity and complexity of this project. So we go back to the small business office, and it did. It's just in the way that they wrote it, they didn't delve into enough to say, hey, this is how. So it's really, really incumbent upon the you or the small businesses to actually show how your background, your performance, how it matches that exact skill set that we're looking for. Not just saying I did this project.
Understand. Let's talk about also go into opportunity area. Which commodities or services consistently offer the strongest opportunity for our veteran community?
So I would say we talked a little bit about the diversity of our supply chain. So I would answer that with all of our supply chains, really though.
Okay.
And that's why I'm so grateful for the opportunity to having met you and to have this opportunity today, because we really are. We're looking for veteran-owned businesses. We're specifically looking for manufacturers, and I am going to read this. So for the National Defense Strategy, one of the things that we're aligning to, obviously, is the statement in there that we must build enduring advantages by securing our critical supply chains, aggressively enforcing Buy American principles, and reshoring our defense industrial base to reduce reliance on foreign adversaries. So we are really pushing for domestic sources, areas where we need to onshore more. I talked a little bit about critical minerals. That's an area. We're also looking at advanced manufacturing and different, I think in each supply chain, we have gaps in our supply chain where we can bring on new entrants. So I would say across the board, it's really an opportunity.
Okay. So as you So in a nutshell, what we're saying is that as advertising, as advanced manufacturing, supply chain analysis, and automation become more important, that these things are critical, and these are areas where our small business, our veteran community could really play a
Yeah,
important role.
absolutely,
Okay.
and absolutely. And I have later, if we don't get to it, we do have an innovation tech area where we actually list out, and it's similar to a lot of the agencies that we use. The small business innovation research programs, and we have a lot of open announcements on areas that we're interested in from a technology and innovation area, and they're open right now. I think a lot of people don't know that. Coming into the office, I knew about it, but I wasn't as familiar, so I've gotten to know a lot about it, and I think that's an area where a lot of small businesses don't realize the opportunities there. And as you go through that, and you're approved, once your product goes through, you can actually have, after that, a sole source award directly after that using different funding.
I really would like to spend some time later on and talk about that innovation process, because I think one of the beauties with small businesses, and I will always give that emphasis to our veteran community, is that they really do have innovation.
Oh, they
and
do,
sometimes the things that you want or need haven't even been thought about, and that small business can do that. They've
Right.
put the work, the time, the energy, the effort into it. And I always say that, you know, going that extra mile to find the answer or solution, and to have an innovation lab where they can do this, so that the acquisition people can then look into that portal, so to speak,
Right.
and be able to see and have a clear picture or an idea of what of the possibility. So let's talk about that more later
I would
on.
love to.
Okay.
I want to, because I want to tell you, we did last year like a Shark Tank type theme. So we got a lot of good feedback from that.
Okay, looking forward to that. Let's go from there, and with the opportunity comes questions, assumptions, and sometimes there is misinformation. So let's talk about reducing misinformation. There's often conflicting advice in the vendor community, and so if you could correct one persistent myth about doing business with DLA, what would you say to our audience or to our virtual community of one of those myths?
I would say, and we talked a little bit about this earlier, one of the big myths is that you have to be a large defense contractor to do business with the Department of War and with DLA. And so I kind of talked about like the diversity of our different supply chains, and much of what we do is with small businesses. I gave you some of the statistics. For new entrants, last year I did want to note we had almost 1,000 new entrants last year across all of our supply chains. But I would say the biggest myth is that you have to be a large prime, and we have lots of opportunities where we contract directly, not just subcontracting, but contract directly with small businesses. And I talked about a lot of those opportunities we put out. We don't bundle them. We put them out at the SAT threshold, so we can get that competition and products from our small businesses.
Okay. And the last thing is that one question before we go to questions is that for business that want to compete but don't know where to begin, what advice would you give them?
Oh gosh, I have so much advice on that topic. So I would say for DLA specifically, the supplier pathway tool that I mentioned is the best one to go to. It really matches you up. The second one, we actually did this. This is another digital thing that we did this past year. One of the things we found is that we have multiple small business offices at each of our supply chains. So we would have companies come in, and we used email boxes, and it was not working. We weren't seeing across the board. I didn't have visibility into it, and if someone left the office, you just don't have that visibility. And we wanted to see what are the things that small businesses are asking, what are the trends, We want to make sure we're responsive. So on our website, we have a digital front where you can put a question in, and based on your question, it will route you within that small business office. But on the back end, we can actually see it come in. We can see who it's going to. We can actually see the question.
Right.
And we use our data analytics to make sure it's answered within a 5-day period, but also to collect it to see, hey, are all the small businesses having an issue with DLA's process across the board? We really need to change this process. And so, it's great. And then we can also see where we had problem areas. It might just be in one supply chain. So that data analytics is really helping us kind of really see and be responsive to our small businesses. So I always encourage small businesses, go there, put it in. It's not, a death trap of non-responsiveness. It's actually much easier, and you will get a response from using that.
And accountability.
And accountability,
for us,
Yes,
for you,
yes.
for the offices to make sure that there's a trail
Right.
to show that everyone,
Exactly, yep.
So Danielle, I want to take a moment to address a few questions submitted by our listeners. Do we have any questions, 1 or 2 questions before we go?
As a small business, how can we promote ourselves better about being an American company to compete against the larger companies in our area that wins bids over us and they're not in the U.S.?
So I would say for DLA, it's specific on what the requirement is. Some of our, it is, and some of them do have, we have the Berry Amendment, for example, in our clothing and textile area where it is Buy America. Some of our requirements, we have restrictions on who those foreign partners could be, or really limitations even on the supply chain of that item. So when many people think about, hey, I'm manufacturing it in the U.S., there's other lower tier parts that go into that end product. So we also look at that.
Look at all of those.
Yes. So I would say in that instance, I would recommend contacting the small business office so we can kind of look through that requirement to see, hey, what are the restrictions or specifications in the solicitation? And I think it's helping show maybe it should be that, but it's bringing that attention to the small business office, and we can help advocate for you. That's a good question.
Yes, very good question. Anyone else?
I guess that's a good question. Thank you both for giving this presentation, and the information is just vast. My question is regarding something I didn't hear, and I'm just wondering if I'm on the right track with DLA and DIBs.
Mm-hmm.
Is that still something that's being used, or?
It is. So when I talk about automation, our different supply chains, we have different areas of automation. But DIBs, as you talked about, that's our procurement board for weapons support. And just to do an announcement. So we used to have, for those of you that have been around a while, we had aviation and land and maritime. So we did a recent merger with those two supply chains, and it's now weapon support. So when I say weapon support, we still have the physical locations, but it's just one class 9, which is weapon support. But we still use DIBs. We actually have webinars on DIBs and how to use it, because it can be really tricky. So I'll give a quick example. We'll see a company come in and put a quote in, and they'll say, hey, I have an alternate part. That will automatically drop you out of the system to go, if it goes manual. So if you have another company that's providing the exact part, the auto system and the way we have it set up, it will, evaluate it on price and delivery, and then it will only go to the alternate product if we can't get competition at that level. So that's why it's so important to understand the bidding system, what you're putting in your quote, what the specifications are. But we do have some webinars specific to DIBs and some of the challenges that we see. Did you have a specific question on that, or were you just asking about
No, I thought DIBs was like an internal agency. I thought DIBs was the internal agency procurement system like SAM, but for the agency first and then SAM. or is all the opportunities put in
Oh,
SAM?
okay, I see what you're asking. No, so we put all of our opportunities are advertised in SAMs. That's a requirement for all of us as federal agencies. But DIBS is our procurement system that it does automation. So for example, it will send a solicitation out by itself. You don't have a buyer that's going the solicitation out. It's our system automatically gets the demand, and it will send the solicitation out automatically. And then it's evaluated based on the parameters that we set for that specific item, and the automated system will actually award it. And so that's when I talked about 10,000 awards a day. Just the sheer volume that we're able to get out is through a lot of our automation like that. And then complex items, like I would say, critical safety items, such as parachutes, I'll say that as an example, those are all manual. So there's certain items we will never put through the auto system because it's so important for that critical safety item for our warfighter. But a large majority for the items that are under SAT, and I talked to it's 350 now, will go on that particular platform. And we are in the process of modernizing our entire look for our procurement system that's coming out in the next year and a half or so. But you'll see a whole new digital front and how you can go in there. And I could talk to hours with you, and that uses some AI capability to help you actually recognize yourself, see your performance metrics. It will say, hey, you might be interested in these procurements.
Oh, that's great.
So, yeah.
Really cutting edge stuff. I enjoy that. So Danielle, thank you for your candor. Thank you for being here today, for helping clear up and clarification in regards to DLA, how they approach the small business procurement process in that space, the cutting edge things that you all are doing, and also the fact that we will continue this engagement, that this is not a one-time stand. This is something that we will continue, that there are going to be other opportunities for small businesses, our veteran small businesses, as we create this pipeline to have those opportunities with DLA, that it's going to be a continuation. So thank you for standing up and taking that step and doing this. It's so greatly appreciated.
Thank you. And I did want to give a shout out real quick because Chanel and I are doing another opportunity on May 19th and 20th. So we're bringing all of our different supply chains here, physically here, and they are specifically going to talk about opportunities and challenges within each of their supply chains. So I would highly encourage you to look at the VA site. We will be here along with others from our supply chain to really give some hands-on information and opportunities, and we're really looking forward to it.
We're looking forward to it as well. And to our listeners, this conversation really is what we mean about straight talk, straight answer. It's designed to provide transparency, reduce misinformation, and to be here for you, to be that advocate, to be that champion, and provide clear, understandable information that's designed for you. Join us next time as we talk again with someone else from our federal procurement space to talk about how we can help service disabled, veteran business, and the small business do business in the federal space, providing you with economic opportunity. Thank you and have a great day.
Straight talk, straight answers. Straight answers for those trying to do business with VA and our collaborators.